Welcome to Unleashed at Work and Home, the show dedicated to helping veterinarians, vet techs, dog trainers, shelter and rescue workers, pet sitters, and all the other animal crazy pet professionals manage their stress and find more joy. I'm your host, Colleen Pilar, and I'm thrilled you're here with us today. Make sure you hit the subscribe button on your favorite app so that you won't miss a single episode. This episode is brought to you by our free community, the Circle of Resilient and Thriving Pet Professionals. If you like the ideas shared here, then you're invited to continue the conversation with other lifelong learners in the community. You can find out more at colleenpilar.com. It's the perfect place for you to learn cool stuff, feel good, and take action to create the life you love. Come join us. Welcome back to Unleashed at Work and Home. My guest today is Dallas Rising, and Dallas has a very different career and trajectory than most of my guests, and I'm really excited to be talking to Dallas today. Dallas is a chaplain, a grief worker, and also a strengths coach, and the path from childhood to here has got to be a fascinating story, and we're going to ask about that in a minute. But first, let's just ask Dallas, what does that even mean? What are those jobs?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm really glad to be here. And I always get a little bit tongue-tied when I try to explain, in a social context, a casual context, what it is that I do. So it's really nice to have an opportunity to be able to explain it fully. So the first piece is the chaplaincy piece. I'm an interfaith chaplain, and I'm also agnostic, which means that I am open to the mystery of whether or not a higher power exists. I don't feel certain about that, which might also be a little bit unusual.
Very
Just to
unusual.
add on, continuing with that theme. So that means that I am extremely happy to work with people who identify as atheist or agnostic, or people who do have some kind of a relationship with a higher power. All of them are very welcome. And another thing that's unusual about me is that I specifically work with people around interspecies connections and interspecies feelings. My people that I work with as a chaplain are folks that are seeking spiritual support for either a relationship or a situation, a loss or a transition around animals.
Yeah.
And so sometimes that looks like a person who has a particular relationship with a particular animal. And sometimes that looks like a person whose career or volunteer work is on behalf of or in service to other species. And there's a whole lot of feelings that go along with that. And the key component in both of them, or the common denominator, is that people find this work extremely important and central and core to who they are, their identity, and what really matters to them and what gives their life meaning. And so that is my work as a chaplain. The grief worker part, I'm a somatic grief worker, so I'm trained as a yoga specialist, and that I bring somatic or like body-based processing to grief, and I've been doing that for several years. I became a yoga teacher knowing I wanted to work with people who were in grief, and so that you can learn more about that on my website. I won't go into great detail here. And then the strengths component is kind of the lighter side of what it is that I do, and I work with individuals and teams to talk about what it is that they are naturally good at and what it is that they love to do. They tend to be the same thing, what we're naturally good at and love to do. And that makes them really effective. And so all of those things combine to make me kind of a unique support role for a lot of folks.
Yeah. I have so many questions going through my head right now that I would like to jettison my usual order of ways of asking about things. And I'd like to start with the grief and the somatics and why it's so important to look at the somatic elements of grief, and why and how it's helpful for people to be aware of that and what they can do, because we do carry so much in our bodies in this work, and it's so important to people and it's so meaningful to them. But some of the advice can be really hard to apply. And to understand that connection and how to release it could be really helpful. So can you just talk a little bit about that? Like, why is it important to have a somatic sense of grief and also how to work through it?
Yeah, well, I think it, I don't know specifically about what the how to apply things, what that refers to, but the thing that came to mind for me is that so often when we're in pain, and when we're suffering, there is a and also overwhelmed, there's that component too, depleted in any kind of way, it's common to feel a sense of desperation or a sense of just, yeah, I mean, a desperation to fix it, to
Mm-hmm.
fix it and fix it fast because this isn't tolerable and it's not convenient and it isn't, I don't have time for this. Um, and also, I don't know what to do in these scenarios. And so that can sometimes mean that people go looking for answers that are outside of themselves. Like, just tell me what to do, just tell me how to fix it. And my work isn't formulaic like that. It's not prescriptive. And so what I do, bringing that the chaplaincy piece in a little bit more, even though I'm not in the somatics, I'm not applying that spiritual support, and we're not having conversations because it's body based. But my job is more about providing a good container for people to be able to set them up in a way that they can go a little bit closer to what it is that hurts, provide the time, help people feel supported in that, and allow for either a processing of some kind or to receive information, wisdom, whatever it is that's in there. But the reason that I approach it from a physical standpoint, or a nonverbal standpoint, I'll also say that because some of the work that I do is based in um, is writing or walking, um, like nature immersion and labyrinth walks and writing sessions. So, but what it isn't is it isn't talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
It's approaching it in a different way. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that talk therapy is usually where people start,
Mm-hmm.
or it's what they avoid because they don't want to talk about it. And if they think that that's the only option, then they don't do anything.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm looking to either be a support that is a complement to, but not the same thing as talk therapy, um, or be an alternative to that if people just don't want to talk about it and they don't want to share.
Yeah.
So that is okay. We are a chatty species. We talk a lot, either verbally or signing, and we're
Mm-hmm.
communicating a lot. But one thing that we don't do, especially in our culture, is we don't have a lot of time and space that's dedicated to just one thing. We're often multitasking. We're switching between things very quickly, and that's not really how grief works.
No, that is not how grief works.
Right.
Definitely not.
So grief is not going to be cheated in terms of the attention that it needs in order to be handled.
Mm-hmm.
Grief is not going to negotiate on that. So sometimes people feel a little like they have expectations about what this will look like. Like, I'm going to come and I'm going to feel a whole bunch of things. It'll be really cathartic. I'll cry a bunch. And they might show up and it might be that they feel kind of numb or irritated because it isn't going the way that they want it to be, or that they're not ready. There's something in the way. And that's okay too, because we're still giving it the space and time to
Mm-hmm.
be with what's there and trusting that the important part is the willingness, and it's not necessarily the doing.
Yeah.
How willing are you? How willing are you to be with us and to listen?
And it is a lot about the listening, the space, what did you say? You said getting closer to what hurts. And I think that's kind of the piece of that. It's not like you have to force yourself into the fire of it all and feel it all, but we do have this tendency to avoid and and run, and to just find ways to be with what it is that's hurting, to allow the space for the processing and the emotional. I almost said resolution, but it's not even resolution. It's such a variety of emotions that go through us, and just for any of them to be present. And when you mentioned that people might come and feel numb or irritated, I think that that's such a helpful thing to say and share too, because whatever your experience is what your experience is, and that there's value in whatever that is. There's learning to be had in all of those spots, but to specifically gather with somebody to be, I don't know, conscious of or addressing grief, even if nothing happens, something's happened because of that moment of making a decision that this is important to me and I'm going to be here. And so something at some level will be integrating and evolving and shifting for people just by virtue of saying, this is important enough to me that I'm going to make an appointment. And then from there, with the skills that you have to add in the other pieces. And it is so interesting how we are extremely verbal, but often in our verbal abilities, we manage to disconnect from the emotional pieces. Like every now and then with my clients, I talk to them about like, okay, I hear your brilliant brain. I'm super curious about what your body's feeling right now or what's going on the, some of that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's some interesting parts of that in terms of experience. So what drew you, well, which came first? Grief worker or chaplain?
Grief worker.
Grief worker. And so what drew you to grief worker?
Involuntary loss was my trajectory there. It's so you work with people who are struggling with burnout.
Oh,
Right?
yeah.
And my first career, I worked in anti-speciesism. And so I did animal advocacy, is another way you could say that. And so I was active in the animal liberation movement. And I had done all kinds of different things. It was a couple decades that I did that work. So all kinds of things, and a lot of exposure to violence kind of had this transference of trauma onto me as a result from being in the position of witnessing so much injustice or violence or systemic cruelty, and on such an incredibly massive scale. And so that is difficult to do. It's also difficult to do in groups of people who are all experiencing that at the same time,
Yeah.
because everybody is in the same boat. And if nobody is well resourced to navigate that space, then there isn't a whole lot of extra kindness, compassion, um, grace to go around. And so that was an added component. What I used to say is, I said, I feel like I see violence in places other people don't see it. And so that was really alienating and isolating as well. And it was a very difficult time and work to do. Um, so I was doing that work. And then I had a back injury that took me out of a martial arts practice that I had been using as a coping mechanism and also quite enjoying, but it was very much a part of how I was coping,
Mm-hmm.
which is interesting because that's a body based practice, right? I would go
Mm-hmm.
and I would hit and I would kick and I would knee and elbow. And I was able to get a lot of those feelings moving through me, through my body. And then I injured my back and I couldn't do that anymore. And then my sister died unexpectedly. And my sister, I won't go into a whole lot of details, but it was very difficult. My mom lost a child, which is some of the worst fears that a parent can have. And my mom was diagnosed with cancer. And just to kind of go through, the cancer diagnosis happened about 10 days later. And then my cat died. And then my dog died. And he was like my heart dog. He had had brain surgery earlier in the year. We were doing everything we could to have some good time left with him. And he passed And then within a few months, I had a nephew who was struck and killed by a distracted driver. And then a few months later, my 16-year-old nephew died by suicide. And these are two different, so those two nephews were the children of each of my remaining living sisters. And so when you look at this constellation, and my mom is going through chemo, I left my job in that time because there was no way that I could continue to do all of this. And that was my identity. And that was my life's purpose and my calling and my reason for being in the world. So all of those things combined were really devastating. And because of the back injury, I turned to yoga. And yoga was a tool that I was using to help me kind of ride those waves of loss. So I wanted to do yoga teacher training so that I could learn how to create spaces that felt healing, like I had been able to experience. And that's why I knew I wanted to work with grieving people when I did that. It wasn't until later that the chaplaincy piece came into play, when I went back to church after a 20-year loss. That was during the pandemic. And I also live in Minneapolis. I live in George Floyd Square. So George Floyd was murdered by Minneapolis police a block from my home. And that was another big, huge thing. And I needed something. I needed some comfort, a place of solace, a place of sanctuary to just help survive this time that was so tumultuous and confusing and hard. So I started going back to church. And in that time, I signed up for a spiritual deepening course basically through my church for a year. And we worked with spiritual directors one-on-one. And my spiritual director asked me, where do you find the sacred or the holy? Because we were kind of going and I was struggling, like, I don't know, prayer doesn't feel like a good spiritual practice. And, meditation isn't really it. And, I just was struggling to figure out what mine was. And I knew immediately, well, the sacred and the holy, that is in my dog.
Yeah.
That's in the love I feel for my dog. That's where, it's like, that's it. So, it kind of came back. It's like my purpose, my being, my calling, all the things that I really cared about in life and was willing to make deep sacrifices for is all in that interspecies connection, that love and recognition, that sentience that transcends species barrier is where biodiversity is just lights me up. And so that's the grief worker came first. The chaplaincy came a little bit later. But the loss of that sense of purpose and the love that came from that drive to want to be of service and want to help create conditions that can ease suffering and enhance and help other people recognize the holiness and the sacredness of the fact that humans aren't the only ones that feel and care about their families and want joy and play and connection.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's how those two things connect.
Thank you. Thank you. That was so beautiful to listen to. And there was such realness in how you shared it with, where some of the things that work really well for some people didn't work for you, and that you were seeking and searching. And that simple question of where do you find the holy and the magical or the mystical of, it isn't the same for all of us. There are no one size fits all answers. And that is the beauty and the difficulty of this kind of work, is that we do need to get curious about what is it for you? What is it for you? And I'm sure for many, many, many of the people who listen to this, they would agree that the connection with animals is one of the places where they can find that sort of thing, because that's what draws us into this kind of work. But it's not the first answer that most people come to. And so for you, it's probably great that meditation wasn't it for you, or prayer wasn't it for you, because it allowed you to search for and then articulate this other piece that would have been present all the way through and perhaps not noticed or highlighted in the way that it has been for you. And so perhaps for some of the people listening, they can be thinking about that as well, if that it isn't a one thing, whatever it is for you. But this one part might have been maybe even just sort of glossed over as just sort of obvious, like, well, yes, I care about animals, but that piece, part of the struggle is, I don't know if I have words for this yet. Let me think. Give me a sec here. Part of the struggle that I have heard from some of my clients is that they have such a passion and a drive for helping animals because of that connection, that belief, that mystical, magical piece. But that when they themselves feel that they can't make everything okay
Mhm.
or right or solve all the problems, which they cannot because there are always too many, then something in them kind of tightens and withdraws, and they even don't get the same mystical, magical connection sometimes with their own animals, their own family connection with this household. And then that even becomes a source of struggle. Like what they'll say is like, I want to be really joyful with my own pets,
Mm.
these animals here in my household. But because I'm not able to do the big work that I'm feeling called to do, I'm not even able to relax and hang out in the hammock with my cat
Mhm.
because of that struggle, that disconnect, that piece. It feels related to me. Does it feel related to you? I don't even know if I'm articulating it well. I'm like grasping.
You are articulate. I am catching what you're tossing.
Okay.
Absolutely. Um, yeah, and this kind of goes back into our earlier conversation about trauma. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
a little bit. Like we usually, I guess you ask your guests about some words that come to them, that are meaningful, or you
Yeah.
know something that really impacted you. And when I was in that space of burnout and feeling like, it's not only that it was this sort of constant pressure and this sense of deficiency that
Mm-hmm.
I'm unable to, and it's not from lack of wanting or effort or even skills. Like plenty competent, plenty productive, plenty efficient, but the fact of the matter is that this is just too big, and we can't do it alone. We're not meant to do all of this alone. But I'll kind of explain this concept about the whenever there's, I mean, I use the word violence. You, I think, might have used problems, but like there's something that's wrong. There's something that's unjust. There's something, um, and in particular, in my experience, I ran a dog rescue for 7 years, and it was this feeling of life and death always,
Mm-hmm.
because this is a species issue where if we've got someone who isn't human, well, humans, just we don't kill people because of behavior for the most part. I mean, we do have death row, but it's not as common a quote unquote solution. Um, and so I think this sense of that pervasiveness and that awareness of the scale, and conversely, the sense of inadequacy of being unable to do all that you wish you could, that takes a toll on people. And in my experience, it wasn't even just that I couldn't necessarily connect with or prioritize in a certain way, or my own time with my own family, who I will include my dogs in the family,
Mm-hmm.
but I would actively feel like it's not fair for me to have joy because
Mm-hmm.
I am aware of so many others who don't and
Yeah.
can't have that. And it felt, in an immature state, it felt like a betrayal on some
Mm-hmm.
level. Like, I can't possibly do this because if I'm not bearing witness to this injustice or this violence or whatever it is, then somehow I am causing a more harm by turning
Mm-hmm.
away. And so my Judith Herman is an author who wrote a book called Trauma and Recovery. It was very, very eye opening for me. It was hugely impactful. Um, but that's a common experience that people who are witnesses to trauma have. And then also there, I'm guessing that people, there's theories that abound about how sometimes those who are most drawn to serve on behalf of the most vulnerable have experienced harm themselves, and that is part of what helps them recognize
Yeah.
the victimhood and danger, and feel called to somehow try to intervene. And
Mhm.
so, and just a whole lot of people experience a whole lot of terrible things in life. And so my guess is that there's likely significant overlap, if not, a cause and effect necessarily, but there's overlap for a lot of people. And so this experience, coming into the chaplaincy piece of it, that spiritual practice is what helps me now. And so, when my spiritual director that I was working with asked me about the sacred and holy, and I was trying to figure out a spiritual practice, what I ended up crafting for myself is I renew my vows to my dog every night. And I'm sure that there are a lot of people that say, wait, what? Your vows? What do you mean your vows? So I have vows, because that's a relationship that is so key in my life. And we can't always control the circumstances of life, but we can control how we show up, and we can control whether or not we are acting in accordance with our deepest values. And so every single day I have dedicated time that is just for us, where it's our nighttime ritual. We do it after teeth brushing and the dental treats and all that. Then we lay down and we have our bedtime ritual. And no matter what else is going on in the day and what else is being held, um, and the magnitude of that, it gives me an opportunity to really dial down. And it doesn't have to be vow renewal, but if we think about what are the ways in which we want to live into and what do we want to create for the ones that we love so deeply, and be able to connect with what it is that's so special about that connection
Yeah.
and that deep love, that love is going to give you energy in
Yeah.
ways that the guilt and the shame and the disappointment and the frustration can't. Um, so I think about that love versus fear kind of scale,
Mhm.
right? Um, and I know that that's a lot easier said than done. I
Yeah.
I'm aware that that's a lot easier said than done, but that's why we call it a practice.
Exactly. And easier said than done is still totally worth saying, because it there isn't one simple thing, but it is a practice. A lot of little things that add up to make a difference. This morning, I meditate every morning, not well, but regularly. Um, and the way I do it is I close my office door and my dog is in and my cat is out. That's the
Mhm.
routine. And almost always my dog comes and lays and touches my body while I meditate, and I am happy. And today, for whatever reason, she opted not to be here. And I was just like, wait a second, my meditation is not as good. Meditation is supposed to be just me in my head, relaxing, connecting, whatever. Nope. It makes such a difference to me to have this little dog curled up next to me and touching me. Um, it's a funny little thing, but it's sort of like, what is holy and sacred? Yeah, like that little body feeling a need to just be next to mine, just her body touching mine, and her choice. And also today it was her choice not to, and I didn't make her, but I did want to. I
Mhm.
was like, wait. So does that make a difference in my day in that moment, but also over time? The fact that this is just a piece of my day. Like every morning I do a short meditation, and most every morning, 99 out of 100, there is a dog right beside me. Does that make it better? 100%. And
Mhm.
that is just one of many small things that I do that help me. And I think that's kind of the things that are interesting. Some of my clients tell me just a little thing that has come up in a previous conversation, and they say, oh, my brain keeps going back to that, and I keep trying that, I keep doing that. And it's different for different people. And I'm always surprised because I think, oh, I didn't think that was that impactful or that meaningful in the moment. And they're like, oh, that made such a big difference to me because now I can just kind of check in with myself on that or notice that or just little things, but it's practice.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, I love that. And I love that, you know, your meditation practice is your meditation practice.
Mm-hmm.
And that was getting in my way too about what it should look like. My idea of what it should look like or how to do it the quote unquote right way.
Oh yeah.
Because I really
Mine
like to
is
do
not
things
right.
the right way. But what you're saying, that's an embodied practice when you have your body up against your body makes a big difference.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that. I know for me, I mean, we have our nighttime ritual at bedtime every single night, but we also have another ritual when I come home. We have what we call reunion. And it is before anything else happens, everything gets set down on the floor and we have a reunion. And I say the word a bunch of times and we come over and we do scritches and kisses and snuggles. And I just say the word reunion and happy and there's tail wagging. And like that's just a thing that we do. I don't know. It might not happen if I don't leave the house and it might happen 4 times if I am in and out a whole bunch of times, but it is a thing that we do to reconnect and reground. And also an opportunity for me to acknowledge what my priority is when I'm like, no matter what, we can take 90 seconds to have a reunion. Because every time we come together, I want that to be I want that to be joyous.
And I like that you not only named it, but that you say it out loud.
Oh, we do.
So it's like it's an interesting piece of like prioritizes it and makes it distinct and special. It's a ritual, which I mean, obviously this is the work you do, rituals. But for your dog, reunion doesn't necessarily have any meaning whatsoever as a word. It's just noises humans make. But for your brain and your system to hear yourself say reunion as you are reuniting with your dog, that's powerful. I mean, that's beautiful. I love that.
Yeah, I mean, a union is a joining, it's a coming together, it's a making whole. Yoga is to yoke, to bring together, to make whole. And I feel more whole when I'm with them. Now they're such a huge part of my heart. And it's just a little tiny thing, but it is worth celebrating. And to me, it's worth celebrating. I got home safe. They're safe. We're all together. And that matters a lot. And so it's an opportunity to have joy in the day. And even if I was super stressed out or have other things to do, again, it's a practice. And I'm prioritizing, making sure that that they're acknowledged, that they're greeted. I get greeted. It's really nice. There's also things that as a chaplain, we talk also about having ritual to mark transition time. So after something difficult, a difficult conversation, or after if I'm working with a veterinarian, maybe after a euthanasia or a difficult delivery of a hard diagnosis, a ritual washing of hands, which doesn't take very long. Doctors wash their hands all day long, but to make sure that that's done in a way where you can feel the water, you can feel your hands, and you're sort of letting things go. There's a lot of different things that we can do physically that can help your brain, your heart, your spirit kind of process things through.
I have a quote from a rabbi about how ritual is a way of processing information. I don't remember the exact words, but it was such an interesting thought for me to hear it that way. I'm peeking to see if I can see it, but I'm not finding it quickly. But ritual does offer us this opportunity to experience things, but also to make them seen, I think, and to make space for them. Here it is. Rituals are ways for emotions to be contained and channeled. And it's Rabbi Vanessa Ox, it looks like. Ochs. I think that there are rituals that are effective and meaningful for us And then there are traditions or habits or customs that are things that we do that may have once been valuable or meaningful to those who created them, but for the individual in this moment may not. So it's like the line between tradition and ritual. What comes up for you around that? How do we add some of our own holy or sacred to something that we're doing more because it feels like this is what my family does, but it doesn't actually have meaning for me any longer. But the ritual of like this actually fulfills me. Do you have any thoughts about how to bring ritual back into something that no longer feels holy or sacred or mystical to somebody?
Well, I think letting go of the idea that everything has to be profound might be one. I think not everything has to be profound all the time. Sometimes it can be. I think one of the things about ritual for me, I would add the word honoring
Mm-hmm.
into there, like something that feels like it's honoring something. Sometimes a tradition can feel like you're honoring this tradition, you're honoring the relationships, a lineage, um, something along those lines. And it doesn't have to feel as personally profound as maybe it does to other people, but still there can be a level of comfort, or maybe it's a way of caring for people in your life to participate in that, honor your love for them rather than have it be about you, the possibility. Um, the habits, there's a term called habituals, just like you put habit and ritual together. We sometimes I talk with people about that, um, when after an animal that they love has died and they're really missing the ritual and their part, the companion piece, their loved one isn't there
Mm-hmm.
anymore. And how can we kind of shift it around a little bit, these habits so that maybe they didn't consider them as rituals until after the animal had died and they didn't recognize how deeply sacred those moments were until they weren't able to happen anymore.
Can you give me an example of that?
Yeah, so maybe going on a morning walk around the same route every day. And it's just like it's the thing that you do because
Mm-hmm.
this is what we do because the dog has to go out and poop and that's what we do. But
Mm-hmm.
after that, it can't happen anymore. There's this deep sense of loss and an
Yeah.
emptiness because that isn't part of your life anymore. Um, and so, it's possible to still take that walk, do some noticing, some remembering, um, to make it into a more sacred or more of an honoring
Mm-hmm.
um, experience. And then, yeah, I think that the other thing that came to mind when you were talking about that and how do we determine it, and came right to my strengths coaching as well, is that um, sometimes our cultural rules or expectations don't really match up with what it is that works best for an individual.
Yeah.
And so knowing where that disconnect might be, or if there's some kind of tension happening between what a person is trying to do because again it's expected or it's the thing that's held up as the most valuable, but it isn't just the way that a person is wired. Sometimes there can be a little bit of tweaking, but again, I don't have prescriptive kind of, yeah, I don't have any prescriptions because people are all different, but those are the things that came to mind.
We're just splashing around here.
Yeah,
That's what
that's
we do.
good.
Yeah. No, it's sort of interesting just thinking about like what thoughts trigger what thoughts.
Hmm.
Um, so if you had a magic wand and you could make a wish for all of the people who are listening, what is the wish that you would make for them?
That's a great question. I think that like the thing that I'm coming to is this, I wish that people were able to have a clearer experience and connection to love.
Mm,
Kind of coming back to that concept of the deficiency or all of the fear that comes around, all of I can't do it all. I can't possibly fix everything. I just know the difference in me since I came from that place of really struggling against the knowledge of how much was broken and how small I was, which I think, I was younger as well at that time, less patient, had more grandiose aspirations, a lot more resentment and anger as well, but in a more mellowed out middle age. I mean, I'm not totally mellowed out. I'm still relatively radical, but it's like a mature expression of all of that anger is actually love. It's coming. It's for something. I'm for connection, and I'm for embracing all of the wonder and the beauty that comes from the fact that there are birds and insects that sees colors that we can't see. There are incredible ways that marine animals communicate with one another, bats and their sonar. It's just we have a limited capacity, and everybody else has a limited capacity to perceive and understand. And there's just so much beauty in looking at all the different ways that we experience life and the different perspectives that we bring. But ultimately, I think operating from a space that is really connected to what it is that I cherish, what it is that is sacred to me.
Yeah.
That feels, I don't know, sustainable feels a little bit hollow, but it's rich. It feels like that's a rich that's a rich space to operate from. And I would wish that for other people. And I don't have it all the time. Like, I don't want to also, I'm not a guru.
Right.
Definitely not that. But if I could, if I'm included in this wish for everyone who's
You are
listening, it would absolutely be my wish
that's beautiful.
that people would be connected to this, whatever it is that they love, whatever feeds them, helps them feel connected, because that's powerful and it's abundant when we can tap into it. And I know that there's a lot of things that get in the way of that, all kinds of things. But yeah, a more regular interaction with love would be great.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Dallas. I love that. So if people wanted to learn more about you and your work, how could they do that?
Yeah, my website, I think, is the best way to do that. I do not have a professional social media presence, so it's my website is the best option. And it is www.dallas, like the city in Texas. And then there's a hyphen, rising, like the sun coming up, .com.
Thank you so much for joining me today. It was fun to explore some different ideas, different angles on familiar ideas with you. You definitely bring a fresh perspective.
Thank you so much, Colleen. Yeah, I love talking about all this stuff. So thank you so much for giving me an opportunity. And I hope it resonates with a few people out there, and that there may be a few people who have a moment to say, "Oh my gosh, maybe that's me too." Possible.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Unleashed at Work and Home. I invite you to come learn more at colleenpilar.com, where you can be steady, be strong, and belong.